Why have there been 10,000 book bans in the United States in the last school year? What is going on? Just reading an article in The Conversation called "Most U.S. Book Bans Target Children's Literature Featuring Diverse Characters and Authors of Color." In the school year 2021 to 2022, there were 2,532 bans that took effect in 32 different states across the nation. This has continued to increase exponentially, and so now in our current year there have been 10,000 book bans across 40 states in the nation. Most of these book bans disproportionately affect authors of color, women, LGBTQ characters, and other marginalized voices. These bans take place in public schools through public school boards as well as public libraries. A lot of data from this article comes from the organization PEN America, and this organization really watches academic free speech and what is going on with book bans and literacy and the freedom of books in the United States. They also have a map of the United States where these bans are most prevalent, and as can be expected, most of them take place in Texas, Florida, and Iowa. They mention in their article that book bans are initiated by school boards, legislatures, and prison authorities and are a very symbolic form of censorship. Of course, these bans are just affecting publicly available books. Of course, people can buy the book on their own. Their academic article entitled "Book Bans in Political Context: Evidence from U.S. Schools" was published in PNAS Nexus. So their data set for their academic article and for their conversation story was based on the data gathered from the organization PEN America. So some of the rights that are under attack with such book bans is that of the First Amendment, freedom of speech. I have a tattoo of, I never have a chance to show it off, but can you see my tattoo? "Congress shall make no law." First Amendment tattoo. We need to contextualize this in the larger political atmosphere of what is happening in the United States. So the larger social context is one in which public education and public libraries are under attack. They're being defunded, they're being more controlled, and they're being repressed, especially topics related to identities as well as the history of the United States from a critical perspective. And so one of their strategies is to find, the most outrageous quote in a book that they can find and say, this is what the children are reading. But once, it's not just an attack on that book, it's an attack on the whole system that's providing free books access to children. And so it's just a step in the direction of saying, why are we providing books in the first place? Let's abolish libraries, let's reduce the funding for libraries, let's shrink these opportunities for reading. Book bans and book burning is nothing new. Book burnings have been around since books have been in existence. We've seen hundreds of years ago in Europe book burnings. We've seen the church ban books. We see this consistently throughout time. In the United States, there have been many legal cases against books and trying to ban certain books. And so overall, the issue is one of education and critical thinking. Of course, the government and the country want a population that is educated enough to work for the companies, but not so overeducated that they start to question the system and have really strong critical thinking skills in which they can question the dominant narrative. For myself as a professor, one of the concerns that I have is the lack of reading in general. Like, this also pushes people away from reading, and I'm very concerned about my students and just the population in general seems to have declined their reading abilities and interest in reading a great deal. And the majority of the reading people are doing is probably on the internet and on social media. And so people are very engaged with social media, but they're not so engaged with books. So overall, I'm also concerned about just literacy and reading in general, as it seems that people are just less willing and able to read full books for themselves. So have you been affected by book bans or witnessed any kind of spectacle around this in your local community? If so, drop a message and let me know what your experience has been.